kindergarten teacher became alarmed when 6-year-old twin girls started screaming whenever their new stepfather arrived, when she hid a recording device in their backpacks. What she heard that night made her call 911. Abigail Foster had learned to recognize the subtle cues of childhood distress long before psychology textbooks could name them. 20 years of teaching kindergarten in Oak Ridge Elementary had attuned her to the nuances of children's behavior. The way a previously confident child might suddenly hug the walls, how open laughter could transform into calculated silence. It wasn't something she could easily explain to the administrators who wanted quantifiable metrics or to parents who sometimes mistook her concern for overreach. But Abigail knew. She always knew. The classroom smelled of tempera paint and apple juice as the October afternoon light filtered through the leaf-decorated windows. The clock read 3:15 p.m., 15 minutes until dismissal. Abigail moved between the tables where her students were finishing their autumn leaf collages, offering encouragement and gentle guidance. Her gaze drifted toward the back corner where Zoe and Olivia Thompson sat hunched over their artwork, their identical blonde pigtails bobbing slightly as they worked. "Those are beautiful compositions, girls," Abigail said, kneeling beside their table. She noted how Olivia flinched slightly at her approach, another new behavior that had emerged in recent weeks. "I love how you've arranged the colors, Zoe." Zoe offered a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you, Miss Foster." Before their mother's remarriage in August, the Thompson twins had been the vibrant heartbeat of Room 7, finishing each other's sentences, volunteering for every activity, their laughter infectious enough to reset the mood of the entire class on difficult days. Now, in mid-October, they were like washed-out versions of themselves, their movements careful and measured, their once gleaming eyes constantly scanning the room as if anticipating something unpleasant. "Are you excited for the weekend?" Abigail asked, keeping her tone light while carefully observing their reactions. The twins exchanged a quick glance, a silent communication that Abigail couldn't decipher. "Mommy says Richard is taking us to the aquarium," Olivia said, her voice flat, fingers nervously picking at the edge of a maple leaf glued to her paper. "That sounds like fun," Abigail replied, noting how neither girl met her eyes at the mention of their stepfather. "I don't feel good," Zoe whispered. "Maybe we won't go." The classroom door opened, and Deborah from the front office poked her head in. "Ms. Foster, just a reminder that the Thompson twins have an early pickup today. Their stepfather called and said he'd be here in about 5 minutes." The transformation was immediate and chilling. Olivia's collage slipped from her hands, scattering leaves across the floor. Zoe's face drained of color, her small body going rigid in her chair. The reaction was disproportionate, far beyond typical separation anxiety or adjustment issues. "Thank you, Deborah. We'll be ready," Abigail responded, her eyes never leaving the twins. After Deborah left, Abigail moved closer to the girls, lowering her voice. "You know you can tell me anything, right? Anything at all that's bothering you." Zoe's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. Olivia glanced at the door, then back at her teacher. "We can't," Olivia whispered, so quietly that Abigail nearly missed it. "We're not supposed to talk about home things at school," Zoe added, her fingers twisting anxiously in her lap. Abigail felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. She'd heard similar phrases before from other children over the years, phrases that were often repeated from adults who had something to hide. She was about to gently probe further when the classroom telephone rang. She squeezed both girls' hands reassuringly before crossing the room to answer. "Room 7, Miss Foster speaking." "Hi, Abigail. It's Claire Thompson." The twins' mother's voice sounded rushed. "I just wanted to make sure Richard mentioned he's picking up the girls a bit early today. We have a family dinner with his colleagues." "Yes, the office just let me know," Abigail replied, turning to keep an eye on the twins, who were now huddled together, whispering. "Claire, I was hoping to speak with you about something I've noticed." "Oh, is there a problem with their schoolwork?" Claire interrupted, a note of tension entering her voice. "No, not their work. It's more about some changes in their behavior recently. They seem unusually anxious, especially around dismissal time." There was a pause on the line. Well, there's been a lot of change for them to adjust to. The new house, Richard joining our family. My parenting book says it's perfectly normal. Abigail chose her next words carefully. I understand that, but what I'm observing goes a bit beyond typical adjustment issues. Perhaps we could schedule a proper conference. Richard and I are really swamped right now with his work and the house renovations. Claire cut in again. Maybe in a few weeks? I'm sure they'll settle down once our routine becomes more established. Before Abigail could respond, the classroom door opened. Richard Blackwood stood in the doorway, tall and impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that seemed excessive for a kindergarten pickup. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his smile broad and confident as he nodded at Abigail. I have to go, Claire. Richard just arrived, Abigail said. Oh, perfect timing. Thanks for understanding, Abigail. We'll talk soon. The line went dead, and Abigail placed the receiver down slowly, turning her full attention to the doorway. Richard's presence seemed to fill the room, drawing the curious gazes of other students while casting a shadow over the twins, who had gone completely still at their table. Ms. Foster, lovely to see you again, Richard said, striding forward with an extended hand. His grip was firm, his smile unwavering. To anyone else, he would appear to be the perfect stepfather. Attentive, well-mannered, engaged. I hope the girls haven't been giving you any trouble. Not at all. They're wonderful students, Abigail replied, studying his face. There was something practiced about his warmth, a calculation behind his eyes that didn't match the upward curve of his lips. They've just been a bit quieter than usual lately. Richard chuckled, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Between us, they've been testing boundaries at home. The child psychologist Claire consulted said it's perfectly normal. They're trying to see if acting out will somehow bring their old family structure back. The casual mention of a child psychologist took Abigail by surprise. In all her conversations with Claire, this had never been mentioned. Before she could inquire further, Richard turned toward the twins. There are my favorite girls, ready for our big night out. His voice rang with enthusiasm, but Abigail didn't miss the subtle stiffening of his posture, the slight narrowing of his eyes when neither child responded with matching excitement. The twins moved robotically, gathering their belongings and putting on their jackets. Their movements were synchronized in their reluctance, each small body seeming to fold inward as Richard approached. Zoe and Olivia, don't forget your art projects, Abigail said, using the opportunity to approach the girls one last time. As she helped them tuck the leaf collages into their folders, she whispered, Remember, you can always talk to me. Olivia's eyes flickered up briefly, a flash of something, desperation, before Richard's hand came to rest on her shoulder. What are we whispering about? Richard asked, his tone playful but his grip visibly tightening on Olivia's small shoulder until she winced. Just reminding them about the nature walk next week. Abigail improvised smoothly, standing to her full height, though she still had to look up to meet Richard's gaze. They'll need weather-appropriate shoes. We're excellent at weather preparation, aren't we, girls? Richard's smile remained fixed, but something cold flashed behind his eyes. A momentary glimpse behind a carefully constructed mask. Say goodbye to Ms. Foster. Goodbye, Ms. Foster. The twins mumbled in perfect unison, their voices barely audible, as Richard ushered them toward the door, his hand firmly on each of their backs. Zoe looked back over her shoulder. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable, a silent plea that haunted Abigail long after they'd disappeared down the hallway. The teacher's lounge was uncharacteristically quiet for a Friday afternoon. Most of Abigail's colleagues had rushed out to start their weekends, but she sat alone at the laminate table, nursing a lukewarm cup of tea and replaying the twins' departure in her mind. 20 years of teaching had given her a finely tuned radar for children in distress, and every instinct told her something was deeply wrong in the Thompson-Blackwood household. The door swung open, and Patricia Winters, who taught second grade down the hall, entered with an armful of science projects. You're here late, Patricia commented, depositing her load on a nearby table. Hot date. Abigail managed a small smile. Just thinking. Patricia pulled out a chair and sat down, her expression growing serious as she took in Abigail's troubled features. At 58, Patricia was the veteran of Oak Ridge Elementary, a mentor to many of the younger teachers and Abigail's closest confidant on staff. "The Thompson twins again?" Patricia asked gently. Abigail nodded, wrapping her hands around her mug. "You should have seen them today when their stepfather arrived. It wasn't normal apprehension, Patricia. It was terror. Children are remarkably adaptable, Abby. They've been through a lot of changes. This isn't about adaptation." Abigail leaned forward, lowering her voice even though they were alone. 2 months ago, they were thriving despite the divorce. They talked about weekend visits with their dad with excitement. They even mentioned their mom's new friend Richard, without any issues. Then the wedding happened, and it's like someone switched off their light. Patricia's expression remained sympathetic but cautious. "Have you spoken with Principal Harmon?" "Last week," he said without any signs of physical abuse or specific disclosures. "There's not much the school can do beyond monitoring the situation." Abigail ran a hand through her auburn hair, frustration evident in the gesture. "He reminded me that Richard Blackwood is a prominent financial advisor in town with connections to the school board. That shouldn't matter, but we both know it does," Patricia acknowledged grimly. "What about the biological father? Have you reached out to him?" "I called Michael Thompson last week during his scheduled custody time, but he said Richard has been making the exchanges difficult. Apparently, there's been talk of legal action if Michael interferes with the new family dynamic." Abigail's voice took on a bitter edge. "Michael seems genuinely concerned, but he's walking on eggshells." Patricia leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "It's a delicate situation, Abby. Without clear evidence or disclosure from the girls, pursuing this could backfire. On you professionally and potentially on the twins if we're misreading things." "And if we're not misreading things? If those little girls are going home to something terrible every day while we debate professional boundaries?" Abigail pushed her cold tea aside. "I've documented everything, the behavior changes, the physical symptoms like Olivia's sudden bedwetting during nap time, Zoe's recurring stomachaches that mysteriously appear before dismissal. I've noted the drawings they've been doing during free time." She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a folder, sliding it across to Patricia. Inside were photocopies of the twins' recent artwork, dark, heavy-handed scribbles overtaking previously colorful scenes, and recurring images of what appeared to be a tall, shadowy figure standing over 2 small beds. Patricia studied the drawings, her professional demeanor softening with concern. "These are certainly concerning, but children process change through art in many ways. They drew these same images," Abigail emphasized, pointing to the shadowy figure, "independently on different days in different areas of the classroom." Patricia sighed, closing the folder. "What does your gut tell you, Abby?" "That they're terrified of their stepfather. That something is happening in that house that they've been warned not to talk about." Abigail met her friend's gaze steadily. "That if someone doesn't help them, whatever's happening will only get worse. Then document everything, absolutely everything, and keep trying to create safe opportunities for them to talk." Patricia reached across the table and squeezed Abigail's hand. "But be careful. If you're right about Richard Blackwood, he's not someone to underestimate." The school building had fallen completely silent by the time Abigail gathered her belongings and headed toward the parking lot. The October evening was settling in early, a chill wind rustling through the oak trees that gave their suburb its name. As she reached her car, her phone chimed with a text message from her daughter, Megan, a college junior at Boston University. "Still coming to my choir concert tomorrow? 4 p.m. at Marsh Chapel. Love you." The message momentarily lifted Abigail's spirits. "Wouldn't miss it for the world. Bringing flowers." She followed it with a heart emoji, a small smile playing at her lips. At least her own child was safe, thriving. It was this thought that always strengthened her resolve to fight for her students. Every child deserved the security and opportunity she'd worked so hard to provide for Megan. As Abigail drove through the quiet streets of Oak Ridge, her mind remained fixed on Zoe and Olivia. The neighborhood eventually gave way to the more recently developed area where many of the town's affluent families had built modern homes. She slowed as she passed the Thompson Blackwood residence, a sprawling contemporary structure with large windows and immaculately landscaped grounds. A picture-perfect home that revealed nothing of what might be happening inside its walls. The house was brightly lit, and through one of the front windows, Abigail caught a glimpse of movement. Richard Blackwood striding purposefully across what appeared to be the living room, his gestures animated as if in the middle of an intense conversation. There was no sign of Claire or the twins. Abigail forced herself to continue driving, an uneasy feeling settling deeper in her chest. What right did she have to slow down in front of their home, to peer into their private lives? And yet, what responsibility did she bear to two small children who might be silently crying out for help? By the time she reached her modest Cape Cod-style home, twilight had deepened into darkness. The house was quiet and empty, a familiar Friday evening scenario since her divorce 3 years ago and Megan's departure for college. Usually, Abigail welcomed the solitude after a week surrounded by the energetic chaos of 5- and 6-year-olds. But tonight, the silence felt oppressive. She moved through her evening routine mechanically, changing into comfortable clothes, preparing a simple dinner, checking her lesson plans for the following week. But her thoughts continually circled back to those identical faces, those fearful eyes, the way they'd both seemed to physically shrink in Richard's presence. Later, lying in bed with an unread novel open on her lap, Abigail made a decision. Monday morning, she would speak to the school counselor again. She would insist on a formal meeting with Claire, alone without Richard's intimidating presence. She would find a way to create a space where Zoe and Olivia might feel safe enough to share whatever secret burden they were carrying. As sleep finally began to overtake her, Abigail's last conscious thought was of the twins' artwork. 2 small, hunched figures drawn in the corner of the page, a looming shadow stretching over them, and no door drawn anywhere to suggest escape. Monday morning arrived with the brisk clarity of mid-autumn. The school playground a riot of color as children in puffy jackets and bright scarves chased each other before the first bell. Abigail stood at her classroom door, greeting each student with a smile and a personalized welcome, a ritual she'd maintained throughout her teaching career. "Good morning, Daniel. I love those dinosaur boots." "Hello, Mackenzie. Did you have a good weekend?" "Jackson. What a colorful scarf. Did your grandmother make that for you?" Her eyes kept drifting to the main entrance, watching for the Thompson twins. When they finally appeared, walking between Claire and Richard, Abigail's concern deepened. Even from a distance, she could see the rigid way they moved, how they seemed to be making themselves as small as possible. Claire looked tired, dark circles visible beneath her eyes even under carefully applied makeup. Richard, by contrast, appeared energetic and composed, one hand resting possessively on Claire's lower back, the other alternating between the twins' shoulders as he guided them toward the building. Abigail excused herself from door duty, asking the teaching assistant to take over as she made her way down the hallway to intercept the family before they reached the classroom. "Good morning," she called, infusing her voice with a warmth she didn't feel. "Claire, Richard, lovely to see you both. And Zoe and Olivia. I have the nature exploration station all set up for morning activities." The twins' faces brightened slightly at the mention of the nature station, previously their favorite activity, but they didn't speak. Richard's smile was immediate and broad. "Miss Foster, always so dedicated. The girls were just telling us how much they enjoy your science units." His hand moved to Olivia's shoulder, squeezing slightly, and Abigail didn't miss how the child's expression froze, a flash of panic crossing her features before she nodded mechanically. "We love science," Zoe affirmed in a small voice. "Claire," Abigail said, turning to address the mother directly, "I was hoping to schedule that conference we briefly discussed on Friday. I have some time available during my planning period today, or after school tomorrow." Before Claire could respond, Richard interjected smoothly. "Claire mentioned you had some concerns about the girls' adjustment. We actually consulted with Dr. Phillips over the weekend. He's a child psychologist colleague of mine, and he assured us that their behavior is textbook adaptation to blended family dynamics." "I see," Abigail replied carefully, noting how Claire remained silent, her gaze fixed on the polished floor of the hallway. Still, as their teacher, I'd value the opportunity to share my observations and hear more about their home routines so we can provide consistent support. Richard's smile never wavered, but his eyes hardened slightly. Of course, we appreciate your dedication. Unfortunately, Claire and I are in the middle of some major work projects this week. Perhaps next week would be better. He turned to Claire. Darling, what does your calendar look like next week? Claire startled slightly, as if she'd been lost in thought. Oh, yes, next week should work. I'll have to check my schedule. The first bell rang, signaling 5 minutes until the start of class. Richard immediately began to shepherd the twins toward room 7. We should let you get to your students, Miss Foster. Girls, have a wonderful day. Remember what we talked about this morning. Again, that subtle squeeze on Olivia's shoulder, causing the child to tense. I'll walk them in, Abigail offered, extending her hands to the twins. After a fractional hesitation, both girls took hold of her hands, their small fingers gripping with surprising intensity. How thoughtful, Richard remarked, his tone pleasant but his gaze calculating as it moved between Abigail and the twins. Claire and I have a quarterly planning meeting this morning anyway. Have a great day, everyone. As Richard guided Claire toward the exit, Abigail noticed how the woman's steps seemed to match his exactly, how her body angled toward him as if magnetically drawn. It reminded Abigail of the way the twins had been moving, carefully, cautiously, as if navigating a minefield. Come on, girls, Abigail said gently, squeezing their hands. Let's go see what fall treasures are waiting at the nature table. As they walked toward the classroom, Zoe stumbled slightly, and when Abigail steadied her, she noticed the child wince. Are you okay, Zoe? Did you hurt yourself? She fell at home, Olivia answered quickly, too quickly, the rehearsed response evident in her tone. On the stairs. Yes, the stairs, Zoe echoed, not meeting Abigail's eyes. A cold dread settled in Abigail's stomach. She'd heard these kinds of synchronized, practiced explanations before from other children in other years, whose bruises always had convenient explanations that never quite matched the injuries themselves. Well, let's have Nurse Jacobs take a quick look, just to make sure you're okay, Abigail suggested, keeping her voice light. No! Both twins spoke in unison, their voices sharp with panic. We don't need the nurse, Olivia added, her voice dropping to a whisper. Richard says we shouldn't bother people with little things. Abigail knelt down, bringing herself to eye level with the girls in the now empty hallway. It's never bothering someone to ask for help when you're hurt or scared. Never. Do you understand that? The twins exchanged a look, that silent communication that seemed to pass between them like an electric current. Richard says different, Zoe finally whispered, so quietly that Abigail had to lean closer to hear her. He says we're big girls now, and big girls handle their problems privately, Olivia added, her eyes darting nervously toward the main entrance where her stepfather had disappeared moments earlier. And what happens when you don't handle things the way Richard wants? Abigail asked carefully, her heart pounding. The twins went silent, their identical faces closing like shutters. After a long moment, Zoe spoke, her voice barely audible. We can't talk about home things at school. That's the most important rule. In that moment, looking into their frightened eyes, Abigail Foster made a decision that would irrevocably alter all their lives. These children needed help, and if the system was too slow, too cautious, or too deferential to Richard Blackwood's community standing to provide it, then she would find another way, even if it meant risking everything. The faculty meeting droned on as Principal Harmon reviewed standardized testing procedures for the spring assessments. Abigail's notebook page remained blank, her pen poised but motionless as her mind replayed the morning's interaction with the Thompson twins. The subtle winces, the rehearsed responses, the fear that seemed to radiate from their small bodies. All of it pointed to a situation far more concerning than typical adjustment issues. Abigail? Abigail, do you have anything to add about the kindergarten assessment schedule? Principal Harmon's voice cut through her thoughts. She straightened in her chair, blinking away her distraction. I'm sorry, just thinking about implementation. The schedule looks fine for room 7. Principal Harmon. a tall, balding man whose administrative ambitions often overshadowed his educational ones, nodded and moved on to the next agenda item. Abigail felt Patricia's questioning gaze from across the table but avoided eye contact. The last thing she needed was for her colleagues to think she wasn't fully engaged in her professional responsibilities, especially when she was contemplating actions that might soon put her position in jeopardy. When the meeting finally adjourned, Abigail gathered her things quickly, hoping to slip out before anyone could engage her in conversation. She nearly made it to the door when she heard Principal Harmon call her name. "Abigail, a moment?" She turned, steeling herself. "Yes, Harold. Your assistant mentioned you took the Thompson twins to see the school counselor during math centers today." His tone was carefully neutral, but Abigail detected an undercurrent of concern. Not for the children, but for potential complications. "Yes." Zoe appeared to be in pain from what they described as a fall on the stairs. "I thought Ms. Reynolds might be able to get a better sense of what happened." She kept her voice professional, factual. And Zoe refused to show Ms. Reynolds where she was hurt. Both girls became extremely anxious during the meeting. Abigail hesitated, then added, "Cynthia noted the same concerning behaviors I've observed." Principal Harmon sighed, removing his glasses to polish them with his tie, a habit Abigail knew indicated discomfort with a conversation. "Abigail, I know you care deeply about your students, and that's what makes you such a valuable teacher. But I need to remind you that we have protocols for situations like this." "I'm following protocols, Harold. I've documented behavioral changes, consulted with the counselor, attempted to schedule a parent conference." "Richard Blackwood called me directly this afternoon," he interrupted, replacing his glasses. "He expressed concern that you might be, in his words, over-interpreting normal childhood behaviors through the lens of recent family changes." Abigail felt a chill run through her. "He called you? Today?" "He mentioned their family psychologist believes the girls are simply testing boundaries, looking for attention, and that your heightened concern might inadvertently reinforce this behavior." "Their family psychologist, whom I've never met, who's never observed the twins in a classroom setting, and who happens to be Richard's colleague?" Abigail struggled to keep her tone level. "Harold, these girls are exhibiting textbook signs of adjustment to significant life changes," he finished firmly. "Unless you have concrete evidence of abuse or neglect, not interpretations of artwork or behavioral changes that could have multiple causes, we need to proceed cautiously." "And if we proceed so cautiously that we fail these children?" Principal Harmon's expression softened slightly. "Look, I understand your concern, but Richard Blackwood is a respected member of this community. The family brought in a professional opinion. Without clear disclosure from the girls or visible signs of abuse, our hands are somewhat tied." He lowered his voice. "And frankly, given his connections to the school board and various community funding initiatives, we need to be absolutely certain before making any insinuations." There it was, the ugly reality beneath the surface. Institutional self-protection taking precedence over a child's welfare. "I'm not making insinuations, Harold. I'm reporting observable facts about 2 children in my care who have undergone disturbing behavioral changes coinciding exactly with their mother's remarriage." "Observable facts filtered through your interpretation," he countered. "Continue documenting by all means. Try again to meet with Claire Thompson, alone if possible. But please, no more unscheduled visits to the counselor without consulting me first. And remember that our primary role is education, not family therapy." The dismissal in his tone was clear. Abigail nodded stiffly, unwilling to argue further when it was evident his mind was made up. "Is that all? Just proceed with caution, Abigail, for everyone's sake." She left the office with her spine rigid, anger simmering beneath her professional veneer. In 20 years of teaching, she'd faced administrative obstacles before when advocating for at-risk students, but rarely had the resistance been so blatantly tied to a parent's social standing. The hallways were quiet now, most staff having departed for the day. Abigail made her way toward the kindergarten wing, intending to gather some materials for the next day's lessons. As she rounded the corner, She nearly collided with Cynthia Reynolds, the school counselor. "Oh, I was hoping to catch you," Cynthia said, clutching a folder to her chest. In her early 30s, with a gentle demeanor that put anxious children at ease, Cynthia was one of the few staff members Abigail felt truly understood her concerns about the twins. "Just had a lovely chat with Harold," Abigail replied, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "Apparently Richard Blackwood has already complained about my overreach." Cynthia glanced around the empty hallway before responding quietly. "I got the same lecture. But listen, I wanted to show you something." She opened the folder and withdrew a sheet of paper. "During our session today, I asked Zoe and Olivia to draw pictures of their family. This is Olivia's." Abigail studied the drawing. Like most 6-year-old artwork, the proportions were skewed and the details simplified, but certain elements stood out starkly. Claire was drawn small, standing apart from the twins, who had huddled together at the opposite side of the paper. Richard's figure dominated the center, disproportionately large with exaggerated hands and a smile that stretched unnaturally across his face. Most disturbing was the dark cloud-like shape drawn directly over the twins' stick figures. "She called that the bad feeling," Cynthia explained, pointing to the dark cloud. "When I asked where the bad feeling comes from, both girls shut down completely. And Zoe's drawing? Almost identical in composition. That's what concerns me." They weren't sitting together or able to see each other's papers, yet they produced mirror images of the same family dynamic. Cynthia slipped the paper back into her folder. "I've seen enough children from troubled homes to recognize when fear is being carefully concealed. Harold made it clear we need concrete evidence before proceeding," Abigail said bitterly. "We both know that with psychological abuse, concrete evidence is often impossible to obtain until significant damage has already been done." Cynthia hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "I've put in a preliminary call to Child Protective Services, just a consultation at this stage. They agreed the behavior is concerning but, as expected, said they can't open a formal investigation without more specific disclosures or physical evidence." A wave of gratitude washed over Abigail. At least she wasn't fighting this battle entirely alone. "Thank you, Cynthia. What did they advise?" "Continued documentation, creating safe disclosure opportunities, and trying to speak with the mother separately from the stepfather." Cynthia's expression grew troubled. "They also mentioned that cases involving wealthy, socially connected families often require more substantial evidence before action is taken, whether that's official policy or not. So the system protects those with power even from their own children," Abigail observed grimly. "Unfortunately, yes, but there's something else." Cynthia leaned closer. "I've been doing some background research on Richard Blackwood. He only moved to Oak Ridge about 18 months ago, right?" Abigail nodded. "From Chicago, I believe, after accepting a position with Meridian Financial. I have a colleague in school counseling back in Illinois. I asked her, very hypothetically, if she'd ever encountered a financial advisor named Richard Blackwood with certain concerning behaviors around children. And Abigail's heart quickened. She couldn't share specifics, of course, but suggested I look into his employment history before Chicago. Cynthia's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "I get the impression there might have been previous concerns that were either not substantiated or somehow handled quietly." The implications sent a chill down Abigail's spine. "Have you told Harold about this?" "Not yet. There's hardly evidence, just professional intuition and a vague suggestion from a colleague. But it reinforces my belief that we need to keep pushing on this. Bureaucratic roadblocks be damned." Abigail squeezed Cynthia's arm gratefully. "Keep me updated on anything else you discover. I'm going to try reaching Claire again. See if I can arrange to meet her somewhere away from Richard's influence." As they parted ways, Abigail felt a renewed sense of purpose. The institutional barriers were formidable, but knowing she had at least one ally strengthened her resolve. Whatever was happening to Zoe and Olivia, she would not let administrative cowardice or social power dynamics silence her concern. The next day brought a persistent, dreary rain that matched Abigail's mood as she supervised morning arrival. She watched droplets chase each other down the classroom windows, her thoughts interrupted only by the necessary greetings and assistance as her students arrived, shaking off umbrellas and struggling with damp raincoats. When the Thompson twins entered, something in their demeanor immediately heightened her concern. Both girls moved with unusual stiffness, their faces pale and drawn despite the chilly morning that should have brought color to their cheeks. More alarming was the way Olivia kept her right arm pressed protectively against her side. "Good morning, Zoe, Olivia." Abigail greeted them warmly, kneeling to their level. "Would you like help with your raincoats?" "We can do it," Zoe answered quickly, positioning herself slightly in front of her sister. Abigail noted the protective gesture, another recent development. The twins had always been close, but lately, Zoe had begun assuming an almost parental role toward Olivia, who seemed to have withdrawn even further than her sister. "Olivia, is your arm bothering you?" Abigail asked gently. The girl's eyes widened in alarm. "No, it's fine. She just slept on it funny," Zoe interjected, the explanation coming too quickly, too rehearsed. "Our mom said it will feel better soon." Abigail maintained her calm demeanor while internally cataloging another red flag. "Well, if it starts hurting during the day, you'll tell me, right? So we can help you feel better." Both girls nodded without making eye contact, hurrying to their cubbies to deposit their belongings. Throughout the morning routine, calendar time, phonics practice, and small group reading, Abigail kept the twins in her peripheral vision. Olivia clearly favored her right arm, wincing whenever she had to raise it or place weight on it. During art time, she struggled to hold her paintbrush, eventually switching to her non-dominant left hand with visible frustration. "Ms. Foster," Olivia's small voice interrupted Abigail's conversation with another student. "May I go to the bathroom, please?" "Of course, sweetie. Take the buddy pass." Before Olivia could reach for the pass, Zoe was on her feet. "I'll go with her." "Zoe, we just used the buddy pass, remember? Olivia can go by herself, and you can have your turn after." Panic flashed across Zoe's face. "But we always go together at home. Richard says we have to stay together." The comment sent another warning signal through Abigail's mind. Twin children naturally shared a close bond, but the intensity of Zoe's protective behavior suggested something more concerning, as if she feared what might happen if she let her sister out of her sight. "It's our classroom rule to go one at a time, but I promise Olivia will be just fine," Abigail explained gently. "The bathroom is just across the hall." Zoe reluctantly sat down, her eyes following her sister anxiously as Olivia left the room. The moment Olivia was out of sight, Zoe's hands began twisting in her lap, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. Abigail moved closer, crouching beside her desk. "Zoe, are you okay?" The girl nodded quickly, too quickly, her eyes never leaving the door. "She needs to come back. She has to come back right now. She'll be back in just a minute," Abigail assured her, growing increasingly concerned by the child's disproportionate anxiety. "Can you tell me why you're worried?" "Richard says bad things happen to little girls who go places alone," Zoe whispered, her voice trembling. "He tells us stories about it at bedtime." Abigail felt her blood run cold. "What kind of stories, Zoe?" But Zoe had already clamped her mouth shut, her eyes widening in alarm as if she'd said too much. Before Abigail could probe further, Olivia returned, and Zoe's relief was palpable, her small body sagging with visible release of tension. Abigail made a mental note to document this interaction immediately. Telling frightening stories to young children about being alone, paired with insisting they stay together at all times, struck her as a calculated tactic to ensure the twins would never have an opportunity to disclose abuse separately. The morning progressed, and Abigail continued her careful observation while maintaining the structured routine that provided her students with a sense of security. During center time, she positioned herself near the reading nook where Olivia had settled with a picture book, awkwardly turning pages with her left hand. "That's one of my favorite stories," Abigail commented, sitting down beside her. "Would you like me to read it with you?" Olivia nodded, her expression brightening slightly. As they read together, Abigail gradually shifted the conversation. "Olivia, I noticed you're using your left hand today instead of your right. Is your arm still feeling uncomfortable from sleeping on it? The child's demeanor instantly changed, her body tensing. I'm not supposed to talk about it. About your arm? Abigail kept her tone conversational, non-threatening. Olivia hesitated, glancing across the room to where Zoe was engaged in a matching game with another student. When she spoke again, her voice was so quiet Abigail had to lean closer to hear. It was my fault. I made a mess in the kitchen when I was getting water. What happened then? Abigail prompted gently. I'm not supposed to say home things at school. Olivia's eyes filled with tears. Richard says tattletales get what they deserve. The threatening undertone sent a wave of anger through Abigail, but she maintained her calm exterior. Olivia, sweetheart, if someone hurts you, it's never your fault, and telling a trusted adult isn't tattling. It's being brave and keeping yourself safe. But what about Zoe? Olivia whispered, a single tear tracking down her cheek. And Mommy? Richard says if I tell, something bad will happen to all of us. Before Abigail could respond, the classroom door opened, and Claire Thompson appeared, looking flustered. Her normally well-styled hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail, and dark circles shadowed her eyes despite carefully applied makeup. Miss Foster, I'm so sorry to interrupt, Claire said, her voice carrying a slight tremor. I need to pick up the girls for a doctor's appointment. I forgot to notify the office earlier. Abigail rose, instinctively placing herself between Claire and Olivia. I wasn't aware they had an appointment today. It was last minute. Richard insisted they both get checked after Olivia had that fall yesterday. Claire's eyes darted around the room, landing everywhere except on Abigail's face. He's very protective of their health. I see. Why don't you sign them out at the office, and I'll help them gather their things? Abigail suggested, buying a few moments alone with the twins. Claire nodded, seeming relieved to have a task that would remove her from the classroom. As soon as she left, Abigail knelt between the twins, who had automatically moved together, their small shoulders touching for mutual support. Girls, I want you to know something very important, she said, keeping her voice steady and warm. No matter what anyone tells you, you are allowed to talk about things that scare you or hurt you. No one, not even parents or step-parents, has the right to hurt you or make you keep scary secrets. Both children stared at her with wide, uncertain eyes. Ms. Foster, Zoe whispered, what if talking makes everything worse? The question broke Abigail's heart with its adult weight of fear and responsibility. Sometimes brave things feel scary at first, but I promise you, there are many adults whose only job is to keep children safe. I'm one of them, and I won't stop until I know you're both okay. She helped them pack their backpacks, noting how Olivia continued to favor her right arm. As she zipped Olivia's jacket, she made a split-second decision. I need both of you to remember something, she said, her voice low and urgent. If you ever feel really afraid or in danger, you can call for help. Do you know the number for emergencies? 911, Zoe replied immediately. That's right. And you can also tell a teacher, a doctor, a police officer, any grown-up you trust. Abigail squeezed their hands gently. No one should ever tell you that you can't ask for help. Claire reappeared at the doorway, looking anxiously at her watch. Girls, we need to hurry. Richard is waiting at the doctor's office. As the twins moved toward their mother, Abigail called out, Claire, could I speak with you for just a moment? About the upcoming field trip permission forms. Claire hesitated. Can we do it another time? Richard hates to be kept waiting. It will just take a second, Abigail insisted, leading Claire just outside the classroom door while the twins gathered by the cubbies. Claire, I've been trying to reach you about scheduling a parent-teacher conference. I'm concerned about some things I've been observing with the girls. Claire's eyes darted nervously toward her daughters. They're just adjusting to all the changes. Richard says it takes time. Richard seems to say a lot about the girls' behavior, Abigail observed carefully. Claire, is everything all right at home? With you? Something flickered in Claire's expression, a momentary crack in her facade, revealing a glimpse of fear or uncertainty. But as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, replaced by a brittle smile. Of course, Richard is wonderful with the girls. He's just very particular about routines, structure. It's been an adjustment for all of us. And Olivia's arm? The fall she supposedly had. Claire's smile faltered. Accidents happen with children. Richard thinks I'm too lenient with them, not attentive enough to safety. She lowered her voice. I really have to go now. He'll be calling any minute to check where we are. The statement hung in the air between them, an inadvertent revelation of the control dynamics at play in their household. Before Abigail could respond, Claire's phone buzzed in her hand, the screen illuminating with Richard, and a text message partially visible. Where are you? You should have been here 10 minutes ago. Do we need to discuss respect for time again? Claire quickly darkened the screen, color draining from her face. We really have to go now. As she watched the Thompson family hurry down the hallway, Claire's hand gripping each twin's shoulder a bit too tightly, her posture tense, the girls moving in perfect, fearful synchronization. Abigail felt a growing certainty that whatever was happening in that household went beyond strict parenting or adjustment issues. The twins were not the only ones trapped in Richard Blackwood's web of control. Claire herself showed classic signs of an emotionally abused partner. The anxiety about pleasing him, the constant checking of time, the way she echoed his explanations as if they were gospel. It painted a disturbing picture of a household ruled by fear and manipulation, with 3 vulnerable individuals caught in its grip. Returning to her classroom, Abigail picked up her phone and made a call she'd been contemplating for days. Michael Thompson? This is Abigail Foster, Zoe and Olivia's teacher. I think we need to talk urgently about your daughters. Are you able to meet today after school? The cafe Abigail had chosen for their meeting was 20 minutes outside Oak Ridge, far enough that she was unlikely to encounter colleagues or other parents from the school. She sat at a corner table, nursing a cup of tea and watching the door anxiously. The ethical line she was about to cross weighed heavily on her conscience. But the image of Olivia's pained expression and Claire's fear-tinged compliance left her with little choice. Michael Thompson arrived exactly on time, his worried expression visible from across the room. In his mid-30s, with the same blonde hair as his daughters and kind eyes lined with fatigue, he looked like a man carrying a burden he couldn't set down. He spotted Abigail and made his way to her table. Miss Foster, thank you for calling, he said, shaking her hand before sitting down. I've been worried sick about the girls, but every time I try to address it with Claire, she shuts down completely. Please, call me Abigail, she replied, studying his face for any sign of deception or agenda. She found none, only genuine parental concern. Mr. Thompson, Michael, please. Michael, what I'm doing right now, meeting with you privately to discuss concerns about your daughters, is ethically complicated. Under normal circumstances, I would never discuss a student with one parent without the other parent's knowledge. He nodded gravely. I understand. The fact that you've taken this step tells me my concerns aren't just divorce dad paranoia. They're not, Abigail confirmed, her voice low. In the past few months, I've observed extremely concerning behavioral changes in both girls. They've become withdrawn, anxious, and they exhibit disproportionate fear reactions whenever Richard is mentioned or present. Michael's hands clenched around his coffee cup. I've noticed the same thing during my weekend visits, but whenever I try to get them to open up, they shut down completely. Last weekend, Zoe had a full-blown panic attack when I mentioned I might call their mother to arrange some extra time with them. Have you observed any physical injuries? Unexplained bruises? Complaints of pain? He hesitated. Nothing definitive. But 2 weekends ago, Olivia was incredibly reluctant to raise her arms during bath time. When I asked if she was hurt, both girls immediately said she'd fallen during recess at school. His eyes met Abigail's. I called the school nurse to check if there had been an accident report. There wasn't. Today, Olivia was clearly favoring her right arm, Abigail told him. When I asked about it, she initially said she'd slept on it wrong. Later, she let slip something about making a mess in the kitchen and then immediately became frightened, saying she wasn't supposed to talk about home things at school. Michael's face paled. Jesus, what has Claire gotten them into? She was always such a protective mother before him. I've observed Claire as well, Abigail said carefully. She shows signs consistent with someone in a controlling or emotionally abusive relationship. Richard's influence seems to extend to all three of them. I've tried approaching this through the proper channels, Michael explained, running a hand through his hair in frustration. I consulted a family lawyer about modifying our custody arrangement, but without clear evidence of abuse, they said any attempt to change the agreement would likely be viewed as parental alienation, especially given Richard's standing in the community and my complicated history. Abigail raised an eyebrow questioningly. Michael sighed. I struggled with depression after losing my job 3 years ago. It was a factor in our divorce, though we managed to keep things amicable. Claire has emails and texts from that period where I was in a very dark place. Richard's lawyer has apparently advised her that they could use that history to portray me as unstable if I push too hard for changes to the custody arrangement. That sounds like a deliberate isolation tactic, Abigail observed, limiting the girl's contact with the parent who might notice and intervene. Exactly. And now Claire never communicates directly with me. Everything goes through Richard, who insists all correspondence happen through a family management app he controls. Michael's expression darkened. The last time I called Claire's personal phone about a change to the visitation schedule, Richard answered and informed me that any harassment of Claire would result in legal consequences. Abigail took a deep breath, weighing her next words carefully. Michael, I've tried working through official school channels. I've documented the behavioral changes, consulted with our counselor, attempted to arrange conferences with Claire. At every turn, we've hit roadblocks, some bureaucratic, others seemingly orchestrated by Richard himself. What do you think is happening? Michael asked, his voice strained. In your professional opinion, I believe your daughters are being subjected to some form of abuse, possibly psychological rather than physical, which makes it harder to detect and document. I believe Claire is also being controlled and manipulated, which compromises her ability to protect the girls. Abigail met his gaze directly. And I believe that if we don't intervene soon, the situation will likely escalate. Michael's face hardened with resolve. What can we do? I'll do anything to protect my daughters. I've already reported my concerns to Child Protective Services, but without specific disclosures from the girls or visible injuries, they're unlikely to act immediately, especially against someone with Richard's community connections. Abigail hesitated, then continued. We need more concrete evidence of what's happening in that house when no one else is watching. You're talking about surveillance? Michael looked uncertain. I'm not sure I have the resources or knowledge for something like that. No, nothing that complicated, Abigail assured him. But I've been considering an admittedly unorthodox approach. She lowered her voice further. The twins bring their backpacks home every night. If there were a small recording device concealed in one of them, understanding dawned on Michael's face. You want to record what's happening at home. I know it's ethically questionable at best, potentially illegal at worst, Abigail acknowledged. But if Richard is indeed abusing the girls or Claire, having concrete evidence could force CPS and the police to act before something irreversible happens. What about my involvement? If it came out that I was part of this, it would likely complicate your custody situation, Abigail admitted. Which is why I'm not asking you to place the device yourself. I'm simply informing you of my concerns and my intended actions as the girl's father. Michael studied her for a long moment. You're putting your career on the line. Some things are more important than professional boundaries or reputations. Abigail thought of the twins' fearful eyes, the way they seemed to physically shrink in Richard's presence. Those little girls need someone to listen to what they're too frightened to say. After a long silence, Michael reached into his pocket and removed a small, rectangular device no larger than a USB drive. I work in IT security. This is an audio recorder with a 48-hour battery life and motion-activated recording capability. He placed it on the table between them. If you're determined to do this, at least use something reliable. Abigail looked at the device, then back at Michael's face. You came prepared. I've been torturing myself with worst-case scenarios for weeks, he admitted, imagining what might be happening to my daughters while I sit helplessly on the sidelines, hobbled by legal constraints and threats. When you called, I decided that regardless of what you wanted to discuss, I'd offer whatever resources I could to help protect Zoe and Olivia. Abigail carefully picked up the recording device. If this captures what I fear it might, the next steps will involve police, CPS, and likely a significant custody battle. I'm prepared for that, Michael said firmly. What I'm not prepared for is standing by while my children suffer because the system is too slow or too compromised to protect them. As they finalized the details of their plan, Abigail felt simultaneously apprehensive and resolved. The professional and personal risks were enormous, but the potential consequences of inaction were unthinkable. 20 years in education had taught her that sometimes protecting children meant venturing beyond the safe boundaries of protocol and procedure. Tomorrow she would cross that line. One way or another, the silent suffering of the Thompson twins would finally have a voice. The next morning, Abigail arrived at school an hour earlier than usual, her bag containing the small recording device Michael had provided. She'd spent a restless night considering and reconsidering her plan, weighing the ethical implications against her growing certainty that the twins were in danger. By dawn, her resolve had only strengthened. If her actions cost her professionally, so be it. She could find another teaching position. But Zoe and Olivia had only one childhood, and it was rapidly being stolen from them. She entered her empty classroom, the silence amplifying the weight of what she was about to do. After preparing the day's materials as usual, she retrieved the twins' backpacks from their cubbies. Identical purple packs with unicorn patterns, differentiated only by the small initial keychains attached to the zippers. Abigail chose Zoe's backpack, reasoning that the slightly more outspoken twin might be more likely to keep the pack near her at home. She carefully opened the front pocket and located a small inner compartment partially concealed by the lining, perfect for hiding the tiny recording device. After securing it in place, she returned the backpack to Zoe's cubby, her heart racing despite the empty classroom. What she was doing violated privacy laws, school policies, and possibly state wiretapping statutes. If discovered, she would likely face termination, potential legal consequences, and the end of her teaching career. But as she smoothed the unicorn pattern on Zoe's backpack, Abigail remembered Olivia's wincing when she used her arm, the twins' synchronized fear responses, and their rehearsed explanations for unexplained injuries. Some risks were worth taking. The day progressed with excruciating slowness. Abigail maintained her usual classroom routines and activities, but her mind repeatedly drifted to the recording device nestled in Zoe's backpack. Would the girls notice it? Would Richard discover it during a routine check of their belongings? What exactly would it capture during its 48-hour recording window? By afternoon dismissal, Abigail's nerves were stretched thin. She watched with carefully concealed anxiety as the twins prepared to leave, Zoe slipping her arms through the straps of the unicorn backpack that now carried more than just homework and snacks. Richard arrived precisely at 3:30, his usual charming smile in place as he greeted the classroom assistant supervising dismissal. Abigail had deliberately positioned herself across the room, pretending to help another student while keeping the twins in her peripheral vision. Even from a distance, she could see how both girls tensed at Richard's arrival, their small bodies seeming to shrink as he approached. "There are my favorite girls." Richard's voice carried across the classroom, performatively warm. "Ready for our special dinner tonight? Grandma and Grandpa are coming to visit." Neither twin responded with the enthusiasm such an announcement would typically generate. Instead, they nodded obediently, falling into step on either side of Richard as he guided them toward the door with a hand on each of their shoulders. Abigail forced herself to remain in place, offering a casual wave as they departed. "Have a wonderful evening, girls. See you tomorrow." Zoe glanced back briefly, her expression unreadable, before Richard's hand gently but firmly redirected her attention forward. And then they were gone, the unicorn backpack with its hidden cargo disappearing through the classroom door. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of administrative tasks and preparation for the following day's lessons. By the time Abigail left the building, darkness had fallen, and a light rain was spitting from a leaden sky. She sat in her car for several minutes before starting the engine, overcome by the weight of what she had set in motion and the helpless waiting that now ensued. Whatever was happening in the Thompson Blackwood household, it would happen with or without the recording device. The only difference was that now, perhaps, the truth would finally have a witness. Abigail's sleep that night was fragmented and uneasy, punctuated by dreams in which she could hear children crying but couldn't locate them, no matter how many doors she opened. She awoke before dawn, her anxiety about the recording device having only intensified overnight. While preparing for school, she received a text from Michael. "Everything still on track. Girls seemed subdued during our video call last night. Olivia wouldn't show her face. She replied simply, yes. Device in place. We'll update tomorrow." The school day stretched interminably, each hour crawling by with agonizing slowness. The twins were present but unusually quiet, even by their recent standards. During center time, Abigail managed a private moment with Zoe at the reading table. "How was your special dinner with Grandma and Grandpa last night?" she asked casually. Zoe looked down at her hands. "They didn't come." "Oh? Did something happen?" "Richard said they canceled because we weren't good enough." Zoe's voice was barely above a whisper. "He said they didn't want to see bad girls." Abigail felt a surge of anger at the psychological manipulation. "That doesn't sound right, Zoe. Grandparents love their grandchildren no matter what." "Not ours," Zoe mumbled. "Richard says they only love good girls who follow all the rules and don't tell stories." The deliberate isolation tactic was unmistakable, cutting the children off from extended family who might notice changes in their behavior or provide an alternate support system. "What kind of stories aren't you supposed to tell?" Abigail asked carefully. But Zoe's momentary openness had already disappeared. She glanced fearfully around the classroom as if Richard might be lurking in the corners. "I need to finish my work now," she said, reaching for her pencil with trembling fingers. The remainder of the day followed a similar pattern. Brief moments of near disclosure followed by the twins retreating into fearful silence. By dismissal time, Abigail was vibrating with barely contained anxiety about the recording device and what it might have captured overnight. Richard appeared at the classroom door precisely at 3:30, as punctual as ever. Today, his charming facade seemed slightly frayed around the edges, his smile a fraction too tight, his normally perfect posture rigid with tension. "Girls, let's go," he called, forgoing his usual effusive greeting. "We have a busy afternoon." As the twins gathered their belongings, Abigail approached Richard with deliberate casualness. "The girls mentioned their grandparents couldn't make it for dinner last night. I hope everything's all right." Richard's expression flickered with momentary surprise before settling back into practiced pleasantness. "Oh, just a miscommunication about dates. We've rescheduled for next week." He lowered his voice confidentially. "To be honest, Claire's parents aren't entirely supportive of our marriage. Some people find it difficult to accept new family structures." "That must be challenging," Abigail replied neutrally, watching as Zoe and Olivia approached, backpacks in place. Her eyes fixed briefly on the purple unicorn pattern of Zoe's pack. Still there, still seemingly undisturbed. "Ready, girls?" Richard placed a hand on each of their shoulders, his fingers noticeably tighter than necessary. "Say goodbye to Ms. Foster." "Goodbye, Miss Foster," they chorused mechanically. As they turned to leave, Olivia stumbled slightly. Richard's hand instantly tightened on her shoulder, steadying her with an efficiency that might have seemed caring to casual observers but struck Abigail as threatening in its controlled precision. "Careful," he said, his voice pleasant but with an undercurrent that made Olivia flinch. "We wouldn't want another accident, would we?" The implication hung in the air as they departed, leaving Abigail with a deepening certainty that her unconventional intervention had been the right choice, regardless of the professional consequences. The following morning, Thursday, dawned clear and cool, autumn asserting itself in the crisp air and vibrant foliage. Abigail had barely slept, her mind churning with scenarios about what the recording device might have captured and how she would proceed once she retrieved it. She arrived at school early again, arranging her classroom for the day's activities while anxiously awaiting the twins' arrival. When they finally appeared at 8:45, walking between Claire and Richard, Abigail noted their unusually disheveled appearance. Hair hastily brushed, Olivia's shirt buttoned incorrectly, Zoe's shoelaces untied. More concerning was the hollow-eyed exhaustion evident in both children's faces. Claire looked equally drained, dark circles prominent beneath her eyes despite attempts to conceal them with makeup. Only Richard appeared energetic and composed, his hand resting possessively on Claire's lower back as they approached the classroom door. "Good morning," he called, his voice carrying a forced cheerfulness. "Dropping off our little scholars for another day of learning. Girls, why don't you put your things away and check the morning board?" Abigail suggested, creating an opportunity to speak with the adults alone. As the twins moved toward their cubbies, she turned to Claire and Richard. "They seem tired this morning. Everything okay at home?" "Just a restless night," Richard answered before Claire could speak. "We're working on better bedtime routines, aren't we, darling?" Claire nodded, not quite meeting Abigail's eyes. "Yes, they had trouble settling down." "Well, I'll keep an eye on them today," Abigail said, addressing Claire directly. "If they need a quiet rest period, I can arrange that." "That's very thoughtful," Claire replied, her voice soft and tentative. Richard checked his watch with deliberate emphasis. "We should get going, Claire. I have that 9:15 client meeting, and you need to prepare those contract revisions before noon." As they said their goodbyes, Abigail noticed Claire's hand reach out to touch Olivia's hair in a brief, almost furtive gesture of maternal affection, quickly withdrawn when Richard's gaze shifted in her direction. It was another piece of the troubling mosaic forming in Abigail's mind. A household where expressions of love required permission, where natural bonds were being systematically controlled and undermined. Once the morning routines were underway, Abigail watched the twins closely. Both moved through activities with mechanical compliance rather than engagement, their usual creativity and enthusiasm absent. During free writing time, Zoe produced a series of dark, heavy scribbles that obscured whatever words might lie beneath, while Olivia simply sat staring at her blank paper, pencil motionless in her hand. By lunchtime, Abigail had made her decision. The recording device needed to be retrieved today. Waiting until tomorrow risked either its discovery by Richard or the battery dying before she could access its contents. During the lunch period, while most students were in the cafeteria, she approached Zoe, who had requested to stay in the classroom due to a claimed stomachache. "Zoe, I noticed something might have fallen out of your backpack yesterday," Abigail said, keeping her tone light. "Would you mind if I check to make sure everything's where it should be?" The child tensed visibly but nodded, sliding off her chair to retrieve her backpack from the cubby. Abigail brought it to her desk, making a show of checking the outer pockets while Zoe watched anxiously. "Actually, I think it might be in this inner pocket," Abigail said, carefully opening the compartment where she'd hidden the recording device. "Ah, here we go." She palmed the device discreetly, pretending to find a small hair clip instead. "Just this little butterfly clip. Is it yours?" Zoe frowned slightly, looking confused. "I don't think so." "Well, I'll put it in the lost and found. Thank you for letting me check your backpack." Abigail zipped everything back into place, her heart racing at having successfully retrieved the device without alerting Zoe to its existence. The remainder of the school day passed in a blur of routine activities and concealed anticipation. By the time dismissal arrived, Abigail had formulated her plan. She would listen to the recording alone at home, and depending on what it contained, either contact Child Protective Services immediately or consult with Michael Thompson about next steps. Richard arrived for pickup with his usual punctuality, though today Claire accompanied him, looking pale and withdrawn. As the twins gathered their belongings, Abigail noted how they moved with careful precision, as if afraid that any sudden movement might trigger an unpleasant consequence. "How were they today?" Richard asked, his tone concerned but his eyes evaluating. "A bit tired, but they participated well," Abigail replied neutrally. Zoe mentioned having a stomachache at lunch, but it seemed to improve afterward. "Did she?" Richard's gaze shifted to Zoe, who immediately stared at the floor. "We'll have to keep an eye on that, won't we, Zoe?" The subtle threat in his tone was unmistakable to Abigail, though it was couched in such ordinary language that anyone else might have heard only appropriate parental concern. "Have a good evening, everyone," Abigail said, crouching to give each twin a brief, reassuring smile. "Remember what we talked about in circle time today, about being brave and speaking up when something doesn't feel right." Olivia's eyes widened slightly, while Zoe gave an almost imperceptible nod. Richard's expression remained pleasant, but something cold flickered in his gaze as it moved between Abigail and the twins. "Always important lessons from Miss Foster," he remarked, his hand coming to rest on Zoe's shoulder. "Let's go, family. We have that special dessert waiting at home, don't we?" As they departed, Abigail felt the weight of the recording device in her pocket like a burning coal. Whatever it contained might irreversibly alter multiple lives, including her own. But as she watched the twins walk away, their small bodies rigid with tension beneath Richard's guiding hands, she knew with absolute certainty that she had made the only choice her conscience would allow. The drive home that evening felt interminable. Traffic snarled unexpectedly due to a minor accident, extending Abigail's normal 30-minute commute to nearly an hour. By the time she finally turned onto her quiet street, dusk had settled, and her anxiety about the recording device had reached a fever pitch. Inside her house, she moved through the familiar routine of feeding her cat, checking mail, and preparing a simple dinner, all while the device sat untouched on her kitchen counter. Part of her wanted to listen immediately, but another part, the part that understood how irrevocably this might change everything, needed the buffer of ordinary tasks first. Finally, dinner abandoned half-eaten, Abigail carried the device to her home office and connected it to her computer. According to Michael's instructions, the recordings would be organized by timestamps, activated whenever significant sound was detected. She clicked on the first file, timestamped 4:15 p.m. the previous day, shortly after Richard had picked up the twins from school. The recording began with typical ambient sounds: car doors closing, seatbelts clicking, the engine starting. Richard's voice came through with unsettling clarity. "So, did anything interesting happen at school today?" The twins' responses were muted, barely audible. "No. Miss Foster didn't ask any more questions about home? About our rules?" Silence. Then Zoe's hesitant voice. "She asked about Olivia's arm. And what did you tell her?" Richard's tone remained conversational, but Abigail detected the dangerous undercurrent. "That she slept on it funny," Olivia answered quickly. "Like you told us to say. Good girls. Remember, home things stay at home. Miss Foster might seem nice, but she doesn't understand our special family rules. If she knew how many mistakes you make, she might think you need to go to a special school for problem children, away from your mom. You wouldn't want that, would you?" "No." The twins chorused, their voices small and frightened. "That's right, because we're a family, and family protects each other by keeping private things private." The recording continued, capturing the drive home and their arrival at the house. Abigail listened as Richard instructed the twins to complete homework at the kitchen table, while he and Claire had a grown-up conversation in his study. The audio became muffled as Zoe's backpack was presumably set down in the kitchen, but Abigail could still make out fragments of conversation between the twins. "Do you think Grandma and Grandpa really didn't want to see us?" Olivia whispered. "I don't know. Richard said they called us bad. But we tried to be good. Not good enough. We're never good enough." The matter-of-fact acceptance in their voices broke Abigail's heart. At 6 years old, they were internalizing a message of fundamental unworthiness, a psychological manipulation that could shadow them well into adulthood if not addressed. The next several recordings captured mundane evening activities: dinner preparation, Claire's subdued attempts at conversation, Richard's dominating presence directing every interaction. What struck Abigail most was not dramatic abuse but the constant, low-grade psychological control. Richard correcting the twins' table manners with veiled threats, monitoring Claire's food portions with comments about watching her figure, creating an atmosphere where every movement seemed scrutinized and potentially punishable. Then came bedtime. The timestamp showed 8:20 p.m., presumably after baths and pajamas. Abigail heard Claire's voice, softened with maternal affection, reading a brief bedtime story. Then Richard's voice, suggesting Claire go take her evening medication, while he finished tucking in the girls. A door closed. Brief silence. Then Richard's voice underwent a chilling transformation, the practiced warmth evaporating, replaced by cold precision. "Now for our special bedtime routine," he said, his tone eerily calm. Hands above the covers, eyes closed. No talking, no getting up, no crying. What happens to little girls who break the rules? Bad things. The twins responded in unison, their voices mechanical. That's right. And what happens if you tell anyone about our special rules? Worse things, they answered. To Mommy and to us. Good. You're learning. Richard's voice moved closer to what must have been the backpack's location. Now, let's check for monsters, shall we? What followed turned Abigail's blood to ice. The monster check was clearly a ritualized search of the room. Drawers opened and closed, closet inspected, even looking under the beds. All narrated with subtle psychological terror. Monsters love to hide and wait for little girls who tell secrets, Richard explained in a detached voice. They especially love to find little tattletales who talk to teachers or counselors. They hide under beds and wait until everyone's asleep. Then they creep out and punish bad girls. But good girls who follow all our special rules are safe. Are you good girls? Yes, came the frightened response. We'll see. Sleep tight. Remember, I'll be listening. I'm always listening. The recording captured the sound of the light switch, footsteps retreating, and then the door closing, but not completely. It remained cracked open, Abigail realized, to maintain the illusion of constant surveillance. What followed broke her heart entirely. The sound of two little girls trying desperately not to cry, whispering reassurances to each other in the darkness. It's okay, Olivia. Just be really still. My arm hurts. Shoo, he might hear you. I want Daddy. Don't say that. Richard will get mad if he hears you. Eventually, their whispers faded into the shallow breathing of uneasy sleep. The recording went silent as the motion-activated feature paused due to inactivity. Abigail sat frozen in her chair, tears streaming down her face. What she had just heard wasn't physical abuse in the traditional sense. There were no sounds of hitting or overt violence, but the psychological torture was undeniable. Richard Blackwood was systematically terrorizing two 6-year-old children, exploiting their natural fears, isolating them from potential allies, and conditioning them to believe that safety depended on absolute compliance and silence. With shaking hands, she forwarded to the next recording, time-stamped 2:17 a.m. At first, there was only silence, then a door creaking open. Footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. Abigail heard Olivia's breathing quicken with fear, though the child remained silent. Then Richard's voice, barely above a whisper. I know you're awake, Olivia. I can always tell when little girls are pretending. A small, frightened intake of breath. I saw you looking at Miss Foster today. I saw you wanting to tell her things. Home things. Our private things. I didn't tell. Olivia's voice was barely audible, trembling with terror. Not yet, but you wanted to. A long pause. Do you know what happens to mothers whose little girls tell secrets? They have to go away. Forever. Is that what you want? For your mommy to disappear? No. The word was half sob, half whisper. Then remember our rules. Always remember our rules. Another pause. Then, I'll be watching you tomorrow. Every minute. Every word. The footsteps retreated, the door closed, and the recording captured the heartbreaking sound of Olivia's muffled crying and Zoe's whispered attempts to comfort her sister without making noise that might bring Richard back. Abigail couldn't bear to listen further. She disconnected the device with trembling hands, then reached for her phone. This wasn't a situation that could wait until morning or be processed through proper channels. What she had heard wasn't merely concerning. It was a clear case of psychological abuse and an imminent threat to the emotional and psychological safety of two children. She dialed Michael Thompson's number first. I have the recording, she said when he answered, her voice shaking. It's worse than we thought. Not physical abuse, at least not primarily, but systematic psychological terror. He's threatening them, gaslighting them, isolating them, creating a climate of fear and using their mother as leverage. Christ, Michael breathed. What do we do now? I'm calling the police and CPS emergency line immediately, Abigail replied, her mind made up. This can't wait another day. He's actively terrorizing them in the middle of the night, Michael, using their natural childhood fears against them, making them believe their mother's safety depends on their silence. I'll meet you at the police station, Michael said firmly. Don't go alone. After hanging up, Abigail took a deep breath and dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, her teacher's instinct for calm clarity took over despite her emotional turmoil. I need to report an urgent case of child abuse, she stated. I have recorded evidence of ongoing psychological abuse of 6-year-old twin girls by their stepfather, including threats and intimidation. I believe they are in immediate danger. As she provided the necessary details, Abigail felt simultaneous waves of dread and relief washing over her. There would be serious professional and possibly legal consequences for her actions. Recording minors without parental consent, violating privacy laws, overstepping her role as an educator. Her career might well be over. But as she remembered the twins' terrified voices, their resigned acceptance of being never good enough, and the calculated cruelty of Richard's psychological manipulation, she knew with absolute certainty that she would make the same choice again. Some prices were worth paying to ensure that 2 children didn't spend another night trapped in a landscape of deliberately manufactured fear. Whatever happened next, Zoe and Olivia Thompson would no longer face their monster alone. The Oak Ridge police station hummed with the subdued energy of a Thursday evening. Officers changing shifts, the occasional ring of telephones, the soft murmur of conversations. Abigail sat rigidly in a hard plastic chair in the small interview room, the recording device on the table before her like a live grenade. Across from her, Detective Lisa Morgan reviewed her notes with methodical precision, her expression carefully neutral despite the disturbing content she'd just heard. And you obtained this recording by placing the device in one of the children's backpacks? Detective Morgan asked, her tone professional rather than accusatory. Yes. Abigail met her gaze directly. I'm fully aware of the legal implications of my actions, Detective. I've potentially violated privacy laws, school policies, and professional boundaries. But after weeks of watching those children deteriorate, after exhausting every proper channel available to me, I made a choice I can live with. Morgan nodded slowly. I've been doing this job for 15 years, Miss Foster. You'd be surprised how often we find ourselves in these ethical gray areas when it comes to protecting children. She tapped her pen against her notepad. That said, the manner in which this evidence was obtained creates complications for us procedurally. Will you still investigate? Abigail leaned forward, her heart racing. Those girls can't spend another night in that house. We absolutely will investigate, Morgan assured her. What I heard on that recording, especially the nighttime intimidation, constitutes psychological abuse under state law. It's not just the content but the pattern and clear intent to control through fear. She closed her notebook. I've already dispatched officers to the Thompson Blackwood residence for a welfare check, and I've contacted the on-call CPS investigator to meet them there. Relief washed over Abigail, quickly followed by fresh anxiety. Richard is extraordinarily manipulative. He maintains a perfect public image. We're quite familiar with that profile, Ms. Foster. Officers trained in domestic situations know to separate family members for questioning and to pay particular attention to behavioral cues from the children. Morgan's expression softened slightly. You did what you felt was necessary to protect those girls. The legal questions about how the evidence was obtained will be sorted out later, but right now, our priority is ensuring the children's safety. A knock at the door interrupted them. Another officer entered and spoke quietly to Morgan, who nodded and turned back to Abigail. Mr. Thompson has arrived. We'll need to speak with him separately, but first, she slid a form across the table. I need your formal statement about everything you've observed regarding the Thompson children over the past months, as well as your interactions with their parents. Abigail began writing immediately, chronicling the twins' behavioral changes, physical complaints, concerning artwork, and fearful reactions to their stepfather. She detailed her frustrated attempts to address the situation through official channels and the institutional resistance she'd encountered. When she finished, her account covered several pages. "What happens now?" she asked, signing the final page. "We'll coordinate with CPS on the initial assessment. Based on what I heard in that recording, there's sufficient cause for an emergency removal while we conduct a fuller investigation." Morgan stood, gathering her materials. "You should prepare yourself for significant professional fallout, Ms. Foster. The school district will likely place you on administrative leave, pending an investigation into your conduct." "I understand." Abigail's voice was steady despite the churning in her stomach. "I'd make the same choice again." Morgan studied her for a moment. "For what it's worth, what you did took considerable courage. Many people would have continued filing reports and hoping someone else would eventually take action." As Abigail was escorted to a waiting area, she caught sight of Michael Thompson speaking with another officer, his face drawn with worry and anger. Their eyes met briefly across the room, a moment of silent acknowledgement that whatever consequences came next, they had acted to protect his daughters from further harm. An hour later, Detective Morgan returned, her expression grave. "Officers conducted a welfare check at the Thompson-Blackwood residence," she reported, sitting beside Abigail. The situation was concerning. Miss Thompson appeared to be heavily sedated. She could barely maintain consciousness during questioning. She claimed to have taken prescription sleep medication, but officers observed multiple empty wine bottles and noted her speech was severely impaired beyond typical medication effects. Abigail's hands tightened in her lap. "And the girls? They were locked in their bedroom closet," Morgan stated flatly. "Mr. Blackwood claimed they were playing hide and seek and must have accidentally locked themselves in. But the lock was on the outside of the door. When officers found them, both children were extremely distressed but physically unharmed." "Oh my God," Abigail whispered, imagining the twins' terror, trapped in darkness. "Based on these findings and your recorded evidence, CPS has exercised emergency removal authority. The twins have been temporarily placed with their father while we continue our investigation. Mr. Blackwood has been taken into custody for questioning based on potential charges of child endangerment and contributing to the delinquency of minors. We're also looking into possible charges related to drugging Ms. Thompson." Relief and anguish collided in Abigail's chest. "What about Claire?" "She's been transported to Oak Ridge Memorial for evaluation. Once medically cleared, she'll be interviewed regarding the home situation." Morgan hesitated. "Ms. Foster, during the search of the residence, officers discovered something concerning. Mr. Blackwood apparently maintains extensive surveillance throughout the house. Hidden cameras in the children's bedroom, bathroom, and most other living areas. The footage is stored on encrypted hard drives in his home office." The revelation sent a chill through Abigail. "He was watching them constantly." "It appears so. Our cybercrime unit is working to access the drives now. If they contain what we suspect, footage of ongoing psychological abuse or inappropriate surveillance of minors, the charges against Mr. Blackwood will be considerably more severe." Abigail absorbed this information silently, her teacher's imagination unwillingly constructing an image of the twins' life under such constant scrutiny. Never free from watchful eyes, never safe even in supposedly private moments. It explained their hypervigilance, their careful movements, their perpetual fear of making mistakes. "There's one more thing," Morgan added. "During booking, we ran Mr. Blackwood's fingerprints through the national database. We got a match to a Richard Blackwood from Chicago with a different middle name and birth date, and another match to an Eric Ramsden from Seattle with multiple sealed records. We're still connecting the dots, but it appears he may have changed his identity multiple times." "Previous victims," Abigail murmured, remembering what Cynthia had discovered about his employment history before Chicago. "That's our working theory. We've contacted authorities in both jurisdictions for additional information." Morgan stood. "You're free to go home for now, Ms. Foster, but we'll need you to remain available for further questioning. And I should warn you, once word gets out about your involvement, You'll likely face significant scrutiny from the school board and possibly the media. I understand. Abigail gathered her belongings, exhaustion settling into her bones now that the immediate crisis had passed. Can I see the girls? To make sure they're all right? Morgan shook her head. Not tonight. They're being evaluated by a child psychologist and settling in with their father. Perhaps tomorrow, once things calm down a bit. As Abigail left the police station, the cool night air filled her lungs with a momentary sense of release. The twins were safe, at least for tonight. Whatever came next, for her career, for the Thompson family, for Richard Blackwood, was secondary to that essential fact. The reckoning would come, but it could wait until morning. Abigail awoke to the harsh buzz of her phone vibrating against her nightstand. Disoriented, she fumbled for it, squinting at the caller ID. Principal Harmon. The digital clock beside her bed read 6:17 a.m. She'd managed barely 3 hours of fitful sleep. Hello. Her voice was rough with fatigue. Abigail. Harmon's tone was tightly controlled. I need you to come to my office immediately. The superintendent will be joining us to discuss the situation that developed last night. So it had begun. The professional consequences she'd known were inevitable. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Make it 20. He hung up without waiting for a response. Abigail moved through her morning routine mechanically, her mind rehearsing the arguments she would make in her own defense, while simultaneously accepting that her teaching career at Oak Ridge Elementary was almost certainly over. As she dressed in a conservative navy suit, armor for the battle ahead, her phone chimed with a text message from Michael Thompson. The girls slept through the night. Asked for you this morning. Detective Morgan wants to speak with you again later today. Thank you doesn't begin to cover it. A small measure of peace settled over her. Whatever came next, the twins were safe, sleeping without fear for the first time in months. She texted back. Give them my love. Tell them Ms. Foster is thinking about them. I'll see them soon. The drive to Oak Ridge Elementary felt surreal, the familiar route now leading to what would likely be her professional execution. The parking lot was largely empty at this early hour, save for Harold Harmon's silver Audi and an unfamiliar black SUV that undoubtedly belonged to Superintendent Watkins. Abigail parked, gathered her courage, and entered the building. The hallways were silent and dim, the classroom doors closed, the bulletin boards displaying student artwork that suddenly seemed poignant in its innocence. She had dedicated 20 years to this building, to the children who passed through it, to the sacred responsibility of nurturing young minds. If this was to be her last day walking these halls as an educator, she would do so with her integrity intact. Principal Harmon's office door stood open, voices murmuring within. Abigail knocked once on the frame before entering. Harmon sat behind his desk, his normally florid face ashen with stress. Beside him stood Superintendent Watkins, a tall, imposing woman whose administrative efficiency was matched only by her political savvy. A third figure rose as Abigail entered. Thomas Reed, the school district's legal counsel. Ms. Foster, Watkins greeted her, not offering a hand. Please sit. Abigail took the single chair positioned before Harmon's desk, acutely aware of the power dynamic established by the seating arrangement. Her alone, facing judgment from the triumvirate of administrative authority. I assume you know why we're here, Watkins continued without preamble. Yes, Abigail replied simply. You placed a recording device in a student's backpack without parental knowledge or consent, Harmon stated, reading from a prepared statement. You violated multiple district policies, state privacy laws, and the fundamental trust between educator and family. Your actions have exposed the district to potential legal liability and public relations damage of incalculable proportions. Abigail met his gaze steadily. I took action to protect 2 children from documented psychological abuse after exhausting all official channels available to me. I approached you multiple times with concerns about the Thompson twins, Harold. I documented behavioral changes, consulted with the school counselor, attempted to arrange parent conferences. At every turn, I was told to wait, to gather more evidence, to be cautious because of Richard Blackwood's community standing. There are procedures, Harmon began. Procedures that failed those children, Abigail interrupted, her calm beginning to fracture. Last night, police found them locked in a closet, while their mother was unconscious from some combination of prescription drugs and alcohol. Their stepfather had installed surveillance cameras in their bedroom and bathroom. Tell me, what procedure was addressing that while we all documented our concerns in triplicate? Reed cleared his throat. Ms. Foster, while your intentions may have been admirable, the method you chose has placed the district in an extremely precarious position legally. Mr. Blackwood's attorney could potentially file suit against both you personally and the district as your employer. Let him, Abigail responded, a surprising calm settling over her. I'd welcome the opportunity to detail in open court exactly what that man was doing to those children, while the systems designed to protect them moved at a bureaucratic pace dictated by risk management rather than child welfare. Superintendent Watkins, who had been observing the exchange with calculated neutrality, finally spoke. Ms. Foster, we're not here to debate the merits of your concerns regarding the Thompson children. By all accounts, your instincts about their welfare were correct. The issue before us is your decision to take matters into your own hands in a manner that violated both law and policy. I understand that completely, Abigail replied, and I accept whatever administrative consequences you deem appropriate. I made a conscious choice knowing it might end my career. Harmon and Reed exchanged uncomfortable glances, but Watkins maintained steady eye contact with Abigail. Effective immediately, you were placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation by the district's ethics committee, Watkins stated. You will surrender your classroom keys and security badge before leaving the building today. You are not to contact any Oak Ridge Elementary students or parents during this period. The board will meet next week to determine whether termination proceedings are warranted. Abigail had anticipated this outcome, but the reality of it still stung. 20 years of dedicated service, hundreds of students whose lives she'd touched, a career built on commitment to children's welfare, all potentially ending because she'd chosen to protect two vulnerable students by unorthodox means. I understand, she said, reaching into her purse for her keys and badge. May I collect personal items from my classroom? You may, but Mr. Harmon will accompany you, Watkins replied. One more thing, Ms. Foster. The police and Child Protective Services have requested your continued cooperation in their investigation. While the district cannot direct your actions in this regard, we strongly advise you to consult personal legal counsel before providing any further statements that might impact potential district liability. Abigail placed her keys and badge on Harmon's desk. Thank you for the advice, Superintendent. I'll certainly keep it in mind. As she stood to leave, Reed spoke again. Ms. Foster, regardless of how this situation resolves professionally, you should prepare yourself for significant public scrutiny. These matters rarely remain confidential, particularly given Mr. Blackwood's prominence in the community. I'm aware of that, Abigail replied. Unlike Richard Blackwood, I have nothing to hide. The process of collecting her belongings from room 7 was painful in its surreal efficiency. Harmon stood awkwardly by the door while Abigail gathered family photos, cherished student gifts accumulated over 2 decades, reference books, and personal teaching materials. The classroom, her classroom for 15 years, suddenly felt foreign, as if already preparing itself for another occupant. As she packed a box with her most treasured items, Abigail noticed Patricia Winters hovering in the hallway, her face creased with concern. Harmon saw her too inside. 5 minutes, he conceded, stepping into the hall to give them a semblance of privacy. Patricia rushed in, embracing Abigail tightly. I just heard. The whole school is buzzing with it. Is it true about Richard Blackwood? About what was happening to those poor children? It's true, Abigail confirmed quietly. It was worse than I thought, Patricia. Much worse. And now they're punishing you for being the only one with the courage to act. Patricia's voice vibrated with indignation. It's unconscionable. It's procedural, Abigail corrected gently. I knew the risks when I made my choice. Patricia helped her pack the remaining items, their long friendship allowing comfortable silence where words were inadequate. As Abigail prepared to leave, Patricia pressed something into her hand. A small ceramic apple, painted with the words, A teacher touches eternity. The ethics committee meets Tuesday, Patricia said firmly. I've already requested to speak on your behalf, so have Cynthia Reynolds and 4 other staff members. Whatever happens, Abby, you're not facing this alone. Tears threatened for the first time that morning. Thank you, Abigail whispered, embracing her friend once more before Harmon reappeared at the doorway, tapping his watch. The walk through the school to the parking lot felt eternal. Students were beginning to arrive, their curious gazes following the unusual procession. Miss Foster carrying boxes, escorted by the principal. A few called out greetings, which Abigail returned with forced cheerfulness, determined not to let them see her distress. At her car, Harmon helped load the boxes into her trunk, then stood awkwardly, struggling to reconcile his administrative duties with what appeared to be genuine personal regret. For what it's worth, Abigail, I wish things hadn't come to this, he offered finally. So do I, Harold, she replied, closing her trunk. But not for the same reasons. As she drove away from Oak Ridge Elementary, possibly for the last time as an employee, Abigail felt a complex mixture of emotions. Grief for the career she might be losing, anxiety about the uncertain path ahead, but beneath it all, a bedrock certainty that she had made the right choice. The system had failed Zoe and Olivia Thompson. She had not. Whatever personal cost she might bear paled in comparison to what those children had endured, and what they might have continued to endure if she had prioritized professional security over their welfare. There would be time for regret later, perhaps, but not for this essential decision. Her phone rang as she pulled into her driveway. Detective Morgan requesting a follow-up interview at the station regarding new developments in the case. Abigail agreed to come immediately, her personal circumstances suddenly secondary to the ongoing investigation. The twins' safety and recovery remained the priority, with her career concerns a distant second. The interview room at the police station felt more familiar today, though no less intimidating. Detective Morgan entered with a file folder and a cup of coffee, which she pushed across the table to Abigail. You look like you could use this, she observed, sitting down. Rough morning. Administrative leave, pending likely termination, Abigail confirmed, gratefully accepting the coffee. Expected, but still difficult. Morgan nodded sympathetically. Unfortunately, that's often the price for doing the right thing outside approved channels. For what it's worth, the district attorney is aware of the circumstances and has indicated no interest in pursuing charges against you related to the recording device. That's something at least, Abigail said. You mentioned new developments? Several, Morgan confirmed, opening her file. First, preliminary analysis of the surveillance system in the Blackwood residence has yielded disturbing findings. The cameras were operating 24/7, including in the children's bathroom and bedroom. We've documented multiple instances of what our child psychologist consultant identifies as systematic psychological abuse, nighttime intimidation similar to what your recording captured, but also more elaborate psychological manipulation. Such as... Abigail's stomach clenched in anticipation of the answer. Morgan hesitated, seemingly weighing how much detail to share. Mr. Blackwood appears to have been deliberately fostering the twins' fears as a control mechanism. We found footage of him entering their room while they slept and moving their belongings to make them believe they were losing their memory or perception. He would hide a favorite toy, then convince them they had broken it and forgotten due to being bad, then miraculously fix it if they followed particular rules. Gaslighting children, Abigail murmured, horrified, making them doubt their own reality. Exactly. He also staged elaborate tests of their loyalty, setting up situations where they could either report problematic behavior to their mother or keep his secrets. When they showed any sign of potential disclosure, he would implement what he called consequence lessons, psychological punishments designed to reinforce their silence. Each revelation deepened Abigail's anguish for what the twins had endured. And Claire? Was she aware of any of this? That's less clear, Morgan admitted. Ms. Thompson has been interviewed following her medical evaluation. She admits to increasing use of prescribed sleep medication, often at Mr. Blackwood's suggestion or direct administration. She describes a gradual erosion of her autonomy over the past year. First financial control, then social isolation, then increasing control over parenting decisions. Classic coercive control, Abigail observed. Was she aware of how he was treating the girls? She claims she wasn't aware of the extent, though she had growing concerns about his strictness. According to her statement, whenever she questioned his parenting methods, he would undermine her confidence, suggest she was being overly emotional due to medication side effects, or threaten to seek custody modifications based on her instability. She also reports that he systematically isolated her from family and friends who might have noticed the changes in the children, including limiting their contact with their biological father. Abigail thought back to Claire's behavior during their limited interactions. The nervous deference to Richard, the reluctance to meet without him present, the haunted look that occasionally penetrated her carefully maintained facade. She was a victim too. It appears so, Morgan agreed. Though as a parent, she still bears legal responsibility for failing to protect her children. The DA will determine whether her diminished capacity due to manipulation and medication mitigates that responsibility. And Richard, or whatever his real name is? That's our most significant development, Morgan said, her expression hardening. Fingerprint analysis confirms that Richard Blackwood is actually Eric Ramsden. We've linked him to 3 previous identities in different states, each featuring a similar pattern. He ingratiates himself with single mothers of young daughters, establishes control over the household, and implements increasingly abusive tactics toward the children. He deliberately targets vulnerable families. Abigail realized, her blood running cold. This is a pattern for him. A practiced one, Morgan confirmed grimly. We've connected with authorities in Washington, Illinois, and Pennsylvania tracking similar cases. In each instance, concerns were raised by teachers, neighbors, or family members, but Ramsden managed to relocate before investigations could be completed. He appears to be extremely skilled at identifying when scrutiny is increasing and moving on before facing consequences. Not this time, Abigail stated firmly. No, not this time, Morgan agreed. The evidence we've gathered, including your recording, the surveillance footage from the home, and statements from the children, is substantial. The DA is pursuing charges of child endangerment, psychological abuse, illegal surveillance of minors, identity fraud, and potentially drugging Ms. Thompson without her knowledge. Given the pattern across multiple states, federal authorities are now involved as well. Relief washed through Abigail, tempered by the knowledge that legal consequences for Richard/Eric couldn't erase the trauma the twins had already experienced. What about Zoe and Olivia? How are they doing? Morgan's expression softened slightly. They're with their father, as I mentioned. The child psychologist who evaluated them reports they're exhibiting signs of psychological trauma, hypervigilance, sleep disturbances, separation anxiety, but also beginning to show improvement simply from being in a safe environment. They've been asking for you. Can I see them? That's partly why I asked you to come in today. Mr. Thompson has requested your presence during the twins' formal interview with our child psychiatrist this afternoon. He believes they'll feel more comfortable with you there. Morgan checked her watch. They're scheduled to arrive in about an hour. In the meantime, there's someone else who's asked to speak with you. Before Abigail could question this, Morgan opened the door and gestured to someone in the hallway. A moment later, Claire Thompson entered. Her appearance dramatically changed from the polished facade she typically presented. Without makeup, her face appeared gaunt, dark circles prominent beneath reddened eyes. She wore simple jeans and a sweater that seemed to hang on her diminished frame. I'll give you two some privacy, Morgan said, stepping out and closing the door. Claire stood uncertainly just inside the doorway, her arms wrapped protectively around herself. They said you wanted to see me. I do, Abigail confirmed, gesturing to the chair opposite her. How are you, Claire? The simple question seemed to break something in the other woman. She sank into the chair, tears immediately welling in her eyes. How do you think? I failed my children. I let a monster into our lives and then was too weak, too confused, too medicated to protect them. You were also his victim, Abigail said gently. Claire shook her head fiercely. That doesn't excuse it. I'm their mother. I should have seen what was happening, Should have trusted my instincts when things felt wrong. She looked up at Abigail, anguish etched in her features. You saw it. You barely knew them, and you saw what I couldn't or wouldn't see. It's different from the outside, Abigail offered. Richard Eric was calculated in his approach. He isolated you, undermined your confidence, gradually took control of more and more aspects of your life. That's what abusers do. I thought I was too smart to fall for someone like that, Claire whispered. I was so careful after the divorce, so determined to make good choices for the girls. He seemed perfect, successful, charming, so good with them at first. She wiped at her tears with a trembling hand. By the time I started noticing the changes in the girls, he had already convinced me that my judgment was unreliable, that my anxiety was making me overreact, that the transition was just naturally difficult. Abigail reached across the table, offering her hand palm up. After a moment's hesitation, Claire took it, her fingers cold and trembling. What happens now? Abigail asked quietly. Michael has temporary custody while Claire's voice broke. While I get help. I've checked myself into a residential treatment program for trauma and prescription dependence. The girls will stay with their father for at least the next 30 days. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. They haven't even asked for me, you know? When they were told they'd be staying with Michael, they just asked if Richard would know where they were. They were afraid he would find them. The pain in Claire's voice was raw, maternal anguish laid bare. Abigail squeezed her hand gently. They love you, Claire, but right now they're confused and frightened. What matters most is that they're safe and you're getting the help you need. Recovery takes time. For all of you. I'm going to lose them, aren't I? Claire whispered. When this all comes out in court, when a judge hears what happened under my roof, I'll lose custody permanently. I don't believe that, Abigail replied firmly. You were manipulated by an exceptionally calculating individual who has apparently done this before. You're taking responsibility by seeking treatment. The legal system understands that family reunification is usually the best outcome when it can be safely achieved. Claire studied Abigail's face, searching for platitudes or empty reassurance. Finding none, she nodded slowly. You risked everything to protect my children when I couldn't. I don't know how to thank you for that. You don't need to thank me, Abigail said. Just focus on your recovery and being the mother Zoe and Olivia need moving forward. They're going to need all the love and support they can get to heal from this. A knock at the door signaled the end of their private conversation. Detective Morgan reappeared, accompanied by a woman who introduced herself as Dr. Elaine Winters, the forensic child psychologist assigned to interview the twins. Mr. Thompson and the girls have arrived, Morgan informed them. Ms. Thompson, if you'll come with me, we have some additional questions about the timeline of events during your relationship with Mr. Blackwood. As Claire rose to leave, she paused beside Abigail, placing a hand briefly on her shoulder. When you see them, tell them Mommy loves them, please, and that I'm getting better so I can take care of them properly. I will, Abigail promised, watching as Claire departed with Detective Morgan. Her shoulders hunched as if carrying an impossible weight. Dr. Winters took the seat Claire had vacated. Ms. Foster, before we bring in the children, I'd like to explain the process. This will be a formal forensic interview, recorded for potential use in legal proceedings. While Mr. Thompson has requested your presence for the children's comfort, I need to emphasize that you should not prompt or guide their responses in any way. I understand, Abigail assured her. The girls appear to trust you significantly, Dr. Winters continued. That's valuable in creating a safe space for disclosure, but it also means we must be exceptionally careful about potential suggestion or contamination of their testimony. Abigail nodded, the educator in her appreciating the necessary protocols even as her heart ached to simply embrace the twins and assure them everything would be all right. I'll follow your lead completely. Good. One last thing, these interviews can be emotionally challenging for everyone involved, not just the children. What you hear may be difficult to process. If at any point you feel overwhelmed, you can step out. The children's welfare is our priority, but your well-being matters too. With these parameters established, Dr. Winters left briefly to collect the twins. Abigail took several deep breaths, centering herself for what would undoubtedly be an emotionally demanding experience. She had initiated this process with the recording device. Now she needed to support the twins through the next critical phase of intervention, regardless of her own feelings. The door opened, and Zoe and Olivia Thompson entered, flanked by Dr. Winters and Michael. For a moment, they simply stared at Abigail, their identical faces registering shock and then overwhelming relief. Then, breaking protocol entirely, they rushed toward her, small bodies colliding with hers as she knelt to receive them. "Ms. Foster, you're here," Zoe exclaimed, arms wrapped tightly around Abigail's neck. "You didn't forget us?" Olivia added, her voice muffled against Abigail's shoulder. "Of course not," Abigail assured them, holding them close while maintaining eye contact with Dr. Winters, who nodded her understanding of this necessary deviation from procedure. "I've been thinking about you both so much." Michael Thompson stood back, watching the reunion with a complex mixture of emotions playing across his face: gratitude, sorrow, and fierce protectiveness. He caught Abigail's eye over the twins' heads and mouthed a silent "thank you" before Dr. Winters gently suggested they all take seats around the small table. What followed was a carefully structured interview, with Dr. Winters guiding the twins through age-appropriate questions about their home life, their relationship with Richard, and the special rules he had established. Abigail sat quietly beside them, offering reassuring smiles when they looked to her for comfort, but never interjecting or steering their responses. The twins' disclosures emerged gradually, first in hesitant fragments, then in increasingly detailed accounts of psychological manipulation that made Abigail's heart constrict with anguish. They described Richard's nighttime checks and monster lessons, the arbitrary rules that changed without warning, the consequences for imagined infractions, and most disturbingly, the calculated way he had exploited their love for their mother. He said if we told anyone about the secret rules, Mommy would go away forever, Zoe explained, her small face solemn. He showed us pictures of places where bad mommies go with bars on the windows. He said that's where Mommy would live if we told. And he said we'd be separated, Olivia added, reaching for her sister's hand. He said twins who tell secrets get sent to different foster homes forever and ever. Each revelation illuminated another facet of Richard's systematic campaign to terrorize and control two vulnerable children, exploiting their developmental stage, their close sibling bond, and their love for their mother as weapons against them. The cruelty was breathtaking in its calculated precision, a psychological torture designed specifically for 6-year-old minds. Throughout the interview, Michael remained silent, though Abigail could see the mounting fury and anguish in his tightly clenched jaw and whitened knuckles. When Dr. Winters finally called a break, suggesting the twins might like a snack in the children's interview room down the hall, he escorted them out with gentle reassurances, leaving Abigail alone with the psychologist. "You've built remarkable trust with them," Dr. Winters observed once the door closed. "They look to you for safety and validation. They're extraordinary children," Abigail replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Their resilience is, I don't have words." Indeed, Dr. Winters made a note in her file. "Their disclosures align with the evidence recovered from the home surveillance system and your audio recording. The pattern is consistent with severe psychological abuse, specifically designed to prevent disclosure by exploiting age-appropriate fears and familial attachments." "Will they recover?" Abigail asked, the question that had been haunting her since she first suspected something was wrong. Dr. Winters considered this carefully. "Children are remarkably resilient, especially when intervention occurs before abuse becomes normalized over years. With appropriate therapeutic support, a stable home environment, and consistent loving care, they have every chance of healing." She closed her file. "That said, experiences like these leave marks. The goal isn't to erase what happened, but to help them process it in ways that don't define their futures." "And my involvement going forward? Should I maintain contact or step back?" From a therapeutic perspective, maintaining connection with trusted adults who supported them during the crisis is beneficial, provided it doesn't complicate family reunification efforts. Dr. Winters studied Abigail's face. You've sacrificed considerably to protect these children, Ms. Foster. Are you prepared for the long-term commitment that continued involvement would require? The question gave Abigail pause, not because she doubted her answer, but because it crystallized something she hadn't fully articulated even to herself. Her connection to Zoe and Olivia had transcended the normal teacher-student relationship the moment she placed that recording device. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, made a choice that altered multiple lives, including her own. Whatever came next, she was irrevocably part of their story, and they of hers. Yes, she said simply. Whatever they need, for as long as they need it. Dr. Winters nodded, seemingly satisfied. I'm recommending specialized trauma-focused therapy for both children, with a component of joint sessions to address their shared experience. Mr. Thompson has already arranged for appropriate care through our Victim Services program. The door opened, and Detective Morgan returned with an update that changed everything. The tech team has broken the encryption on Blackwood's hard drives. It's worse than we thought. We found evidence linking him to similar situations in 3 other states over the past decade. Different names, same pattern, targeting single mothers with young daughters. A serial predator, Abigail whispered. Exactly, Morgan confirmed. The FBI is taking over the interstate aspects of the case. They'll want statements from everyone involved, including you. When the twins returned with Michael, their faces brightened at the sight of Abigail. The remainder of the interview proceeded with Dr. Winters guiding them through a careful discussion of what would happen next. Their continued stay with their father, the therapy sessions that would help them process their experiences, and the understanding that Richard would not be able to reach them anymore. But what about Mommy? Olivia asked, her voice small with worry. Richard said if we told secrets, she'd go away forever. Michael knelt beside his daughters. Your mom is getting special help right now to feel better. Richard told you many things that weren't true. Your mom loves you very much, and she'll see you again when her doctors say she's feeling stronger. Richard can't hurt any of you anymore, Abigail added gently. That's a promise. As the interview concluded, Abigail prepared to say goodbye, but the twins clung to her desperately. When will we see you again? Zoe asked, tears welling in her eyes. Will you come to Daddy's house? Olivia added. Abigail looked to Michael, who nodded his permission. Of course I'll visit you, and when you're ready we can talk about when you might come back to school. Not yet, Zoe whispered, fear flashing across her face. Richard knows where the school is. Richard is going to be in jail for a very long time, Michael assured them. But you don't have to go back to school until you feel safe. Miss Foster can visit us at home next weekend, if she'd like. I'd like that very much, Abigail confirmed, embracing each twin one more time. As she watched them leave with their father, Detective Morgan approached with an expression of grudging admiration. You knew what you were risking professionally when you placed that recording device. I did, Abigail acknowledged. For what it's worth, I've spoken with the DA about your role in this case. He's inclined to view your actions as necessary intervention in an emergency situation involving vulnerable minors. He'll make that position clear to the school board if needed. Abigail smiled wryly. I appreciate that, but I'm not sure it will make much difference to my employment status. Morgan shrugged. Maybe not, but in my experience, doing the right thing eventually finds its way back to you, even if the path isn't what you expected. The following Tuesday, Abigail sat before the district's ethics committee in a small conference room at the administrative building. She had declined legal representation, choosing instead to present her own explanation of the events leading to her placement of the recording device. For nearly an hour, she detailed her observations of the twins, her attempts to address concerns through official channels, and the culminating decision to take direct action. She neither apologized for her choice nor attempted to minimize its unorthodox nature. I violated district policy and certain privacy statutes, she concluded. I accept full responsibility for that decision and whatever professional consequences the committee deems appropriate. What I cannot and will not accept is the suggestion that I should have continued to work within a system that was failing to protect 2 children from calculated psychological terrorism. The committee members exchanged uncomfortable glances. The chairperson, Dr. Eleanor Jenkins, removed her glasses and regarded Abigail steadily. Ms. Foster, this committee must consider not only your specific actions but the precedent they might establish. If every teacher took matters into their own hands when they felt institutional responses were inadequate, then perhaps our institutions would be motivated to respond more effectively, Abigail suggested quietly. Look, I'm not advocating for vigilante approaches to child welfare concerns. I'm simply stating that when every appropriate avenue had been exhausted, when two children continued to show clear signs of distress, and when their alleged abuser used his social standing to deflect scrutiny, I made a choice I can live with. After Abigail was dismissed, Patricia Winters and 5 other colleagues testified to her professional integrity, dedication to students, and the careful documentation she had maintained before taking extraordinary measures. Even Principal Harmon, to Abigail's surprise, offered a measured endorsement of her overall judgment, if not her specific actions in this case. 3 days later, the committee's decision arrived by certified mail. Formal reprimand and suspension without pay for 6 weeks, followed by a probationary return to teaching, not at Oak Ridge Elementary, but at Westview Primary across town. The letter acknowledged that while her methods had violated policy, her intervention had likely prevented continued harm to vulnerable students. It wasn't exoneration, but it wasn't career destruction either. It was a compromise that recognized both the breach of protocol and the moral imperative that had driven it. Abigail read the letter twice, then set it aside with a sense of cautious relief. 6 weeks of suspension she could weather financially. A transfer to a new school would bring its own challenges, but also a fresh start. Most importantly, she would remain in education, the profession she had dedicated her life to and still believed in deeply. Her phone chimed with a text from Michael Thompson. Girls asking when you're coming to visit. Tomorrow afternoon still work? As she typed her reply, absolutely. Looking forward to it. Abigail felt the weight of the past weeks begin to lift slightly. The twins were safe. Richard Blackwood, or Eric Ramsden, or whatever his real name was, faced serious federal charges that would likely keep him imprisoned for years. Claire was getting the help she needed to recover from his manipulation and eventually rebuild her relationship with her daughters. And Abigail herself? She had weathered the professional storm, maintained her moral compass, and emerged with her ability to continue protecting and educating children intact. There would be more challenges ahead, helping the twins through their long recovery, adjusting to a new school, rebuilding her professional reputation, but the immediate crisis had passed. Some decisions, once made, alter the trajectory of multiple lives forever. Her choice to place that recording device had been such a decision, risky, unorthodox, ethically complex, but ultimately necessary. Whatever came next, Abigail Foster would never regret hearing what others had refused to hear. The silent suffering of 2 children trapped in a landscape of fear, finally given voice and, at last, freedom. 6 months had passed since the night Abigail Foster called 911, setting in motion events that had irrevocably changed multiple lives. Winter had yielded to spring, and now summer warmth bathed the small playground where she sat watching Zoe and Olivia Thompson climb on the monkey bars, their matching blonde pigtails catching the sunlight as they moved with the carefree energy that had once seemed lost forever. "Higher, Miss Foster. Watch how high I can go," Zoe called out, her voice strong and confident in a way that still sometimes surprised Abigail. "I see you. Both of you are amazing climbers," Abigail replied, sharing a smile with Michael Thompson, who sat beside her on the bench. "Their therapist says their progress is remarkable," Michael said quietly, his eyes never leaving his daughters. "Nightmares down to once a week instead of every night. Separation anxiety improving. They're starting to act like normal kids again." Abigail nodded, remembering the fragile, frightened children she had first become concerned about in her classroom. "They're resilient, and they've had exactly what they needed: safety, stability, and consistent support." The trial of Eric Ramsden, formerly known as Richard Blackwood, had concluded the previous month with a conviction on multiple federal charges relating to identity fraud, crossing state lines to evade prosecution, and a pattern of psychological abuse targeting children. The evidence from Oak Ridge, combined with testimony from previous victims in 3 other states, had resulted in a 20-year prison sentence with no possibility of parole for 15 years. Claire Thompson had completed her residential treatment program and now lived in a small apartment near Michael's home, seeing the twins for supervised visits that grew longer and more frequent as her recovery progressed and their comfort with her increased. The divorce from Ramsden had been finalized, and she had reclaimed her former surname, symbolic of her determination to rebuild her identity separate from the man who had so thoroughly manipulated her. As for Abigail, her 6-week suspension had ended, and she now taught 1st grade at Westview Primary. The transfer had initially felt like punishment, but she had come to recognize it as an opportunity. A fresh start in a school where Principal Diana Chun had specifically requested her, valuing both her teaching experience and her demonstrated commitment to children's welfare above all else. "Did you tell them about tomorrow?" Michael asked, interrupting her thoughts. "Not yet. I thought you might want to." Michael nodded, then called out to the twins. "Girls, come here a minute. We have some news." Zoe and Olivia abandoned the monkey bars and ran over, their faces flushed with healthy exertion. At 6.5 years old, they still moved with synchronized grace, but their personalities had begun to differentiate more clearly during their recovery. Zoe more outspoken and adventurous, Olivia more reflective and artistic. "What is it, Daddy?" Zoe asked, bouncing slightly with characteristic energy. "Remember how we talked about you going back to school in the fall?" Michael began carefully. "Well, I just found out that Ms. Foster is going to be your 1st grade teacher at Westview." The twins' eyes widened, darting between their father and Abigail. "Really?" Olivia asked, her voice tinged with cautious hope. "You'll be our teacher again?" "Really?" Abigail confirmed. "Principal Chun arranged it specially, since I'll be moving up to 1st grade next year. But only if you both feel ready to come back to school. No pressure if you want to wait longer." The response was immediate and emphatic. Both girls launched themselves at Abigail, nearly knocking her off the bench with the force of their embrace. "We want to go to school if you're there," Zoe declared. "Richard can't find us at a new school, right?" Olivia asked, the lingering fear evident despite her progress. Michael placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Remember what we discussed with Dr. Larson? Richard or Eric is in prison far away. He can't hurt you or anyone else anymore." Olivia nodded, but Abigail recognized the reassurance would need repetition many more times before the fear truly subsided. Trauma didn't disappear in neat, linear fashion. It receded in irregular waves, sometimes returning when least expected. "And Mom says she'll take us to school sometimes too, when it's her days," Zoe added, her expression brightening. "She's getting better at being a mom again." "She's working very hard at that," Michael confirmed, his own complex feelings about his ex-wife's situation evident in his measured tone. He had demonstrated remarkable compassion throughout the process, supporting Claire's recovery while prioritizing his daughter's well-being. The conversation shifted to lighter topics: plans for summer activities, an upcoming visit to their maternal grandparents who had re-established contact after Claire's treatment, the new art therapy program both girls had started. As Abigail watched them chattering animatedly, she marveled at their capacity to heal, to trust again despite profound betrayal. Later, as they walked back to Michael's house for the lunch Abigail had been invited to share, Olivia slipped her small hand into Abigail's. "Miss Foster?" she asked quietly, hanging back slightly from where Zoe walked ahead with Michael. "Are you glad you helped us, even though you got in trouble?" The question, profound in its simplicity, caught Abigail off guard. She knelt down to meet Olivia's earnest gaze. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "I would make the same choice again, 1,000 times over." Olivia seemed to consider this, her expression thoughtful beyond her years. "In art therapy, we drew pictures of heroes. I drew you." Something tightened in Abigail's chest, a bittersweet ache of remembering the cost of her intervention alongside the immeasurable value of its outcome. "That's a very special honor, Olivia." "Thank you." The little girl nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Dr. Larson says sometimes bad things happen, but what matters most is that people hear you when you need help. You heard us even when we couldn't talk." The profound truth of this observation left Abigail momentarily speechless. She had indeed heard what wasn't being spoken, had recognized the silent screams behind frightened eyes, small winces, and careful movements. In a world that often moved too quickly to notice such subtleties, she had slowed down enough to truly see two children drowning in silent terror. "I will always hear you," she promised, squeezing Olivia's hand gently as they continued walking. "Both of you, always." The following September, Abigail stood at the door of her first-grade classroom at Westview Primary, greeting her new students on the first day of school. The room was bright with fresh bulletin boards, engaging learning centers, and the nervous energy of 22, 6, and 7-year-olds beginning a new academic year. When Zoe and Olivia Thompson arrived, walking confidently between Michael and Claire, who had progressed to fully unsupervised visitation and co-parenting, Abigail felt a profound sense of completion. The circle that had begun with her noticing their distress nearly a year ago now continued with the opportunity to support their ongoing recovery and educational development. "Welcome to first grade," she said, crouching to embrace them both. "We brought you something," Zoe announced, holding out a small gift bag. Inside was a handmade card featuring two stick figures with blonde pigtails holding hands with a taller figure labeled Ms. Foster. Beneath the drawing, carefully printed in alternating purple and blue crayon, were the words, "Thank you for hearing us." Later that morning, as her students settled into their first writing activity of the year, Abigail placed the card on her desk where she could see it daily, a reminder of the profound responsibility and privilege of working with children. In the educational bureaucracy's focus on standards, assessments, and protocols, it sometimes became easy to forget the most fundamental aspect of teaching, truly seeing and hearing the children in your care. The Thompson twins had taught her that some risks were worth taking, some rules worth breaking, when a child's welfare hung in the balance. That lesson had cost her professionally in some ways, but the price paled in comparison to the knowledge that two young lives had been redirected from a path of continued trauma toward one of healing and possibility. As Olivia looked up from her paper and caught Abigail's eye, offering a small but genuine smile before returning to her work, Abigail knew with absolute certainty that she would make the same choice again if ever faced with similar circumstances. In the complex ethical landscape that teachers navigated daily, some truths remained simple and non-negotiable. Children deserve protection, their voices, spoken or unspoken, deserved to be heard, and sometimes being the adult they needed meant venturing beyond comfortable professional boundaries into the messy, complicated terrain of moral imperative. The recording device that had captured the twins' suffering and ultimately freed them from it had been controversial, unorthodox, and technically against policy. But it had given voice to what might otherwise have remained silent terror, and in doing so, had allowed truth to emerge from shadows where it had been deliberately hidden. In the end, Abigail reflected as she moved among her students offering guidance and encouragement. That was perhaps the most essential lesson of all. Sometimes hearing what wasn't being said was the most important skill a teacher, or any adult responsible for children's welfare, could possess. And sometimes, the courage to act on what you heard, even at personal cost, made all the difference between a childhood lost to fear and one reclaimed for joy, growth, and possibility. For Zoe and Olivia Thompson, that difference was evident in every smile, every raised hand, every small act of ordinary childhood that had once seemed lost to them. And for Abigail Foster, it was confirmed in the knowledge that her most significant teaching might not have occurred during planned lessons or carefully designed curriculum, but in the moment she decided to hear what others had missed and to act on what she heard, regardless of the consequences. Some lessons couldn't be found in teaching manuals or school policies. Some had to be lived, with all their complexity, uncertainty, and profound meaning. In the small miracle of two formerly frightened children now learning with confidence in her classroom, Abigail found the validation she needed for the choice she had made that fateful night when she called 911. She had heard their silent screams, and in hearing, she had changed everything.